Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Injustice for All with Judge Joe Brown. And today we're going to be talking about the migrant crisis. So, New Hampshire judge to pause Trump's birthright citizenship order. Judge says Trump's order ending birthright citizenship is lawless and unconstitutional and cruel and rules against it. A federal judge in New Hampshire said Thursday he will certify a class action lawsuit, including all children who will be affected by President Donald Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship and issue a preliminary injunction blocking it. Judge Joseph LaPlante announced his decision after an hour-long hearing and said a written order will follow.
This is an Article 3 judge. You have Supreme Court, you have the Circuit Courts of Appeals, and then you have the district courts. This is one of the smallest, if not the smallest state. And they have a judge in that state who had the action filed in front of him. The Supreme Court ruled that class actions could be filed relative to these things, but they did not decide relative to such things whether or not there could be any permanent injunction against the executive authority of the United States. So this is not a ruling on the merits. This is just a ruling on the procedures to be involved. And the judge did stay his order to give the Trump administration a time to appeal to a circuit court of appeals, which would quickly be expedited into the United States Supreme Court. This U.S. Supreme Court that we have now is showing a cognizance of such realities as the Middle East and the Ukraine conflict and what that implies when it comes to the whole alien situation relative to the southern border being wide open and who is to be declared. The background of this whole thing is that there was a horrible case that the U.S. Supreme Court decided long, long ago, known as the Dred Scott case, that involved an escaped slave, and it directly led to the Civil War. So when the Civil War was over, since the Union won, this was still good law. So the 14th Amendment had specific language to overrule the Dred Scott decision and amend the Constitution so it was no longer applicable. Well, sometime long after that, somebody said, well, when we read this language in today's parlance, we can get all of the aliens in here because we want to be humanitarian. We want you to spend probably $2.95 a month at that time to contribute to the World Wildlife Fund, to ASPCA and all that kind of thing, probably $19 a month now. And we want to do something for humanitarian reasons. So even if they are criminals because they broke the law to invade across the border or crash the border, we want to take care of the children, so we don't want to break up families. So somebody said, okay, let's apply that language to what happens when an illegal alien births somebody who's born on American soil. Now, there is a criminal doctrine known as the fruit of the poisonous tree. That's a general doctrine, actually. The criminal version is called Wong Sun because that's the name of the case. And it came out of San Francisco, and it says, if the origin of the situation comes from a poisonous situation, that whole tree's got to be chopped down, and the fruit can't be used if you can't get rid of the fact that the tree itself is poisonous. So somebody broke the law, and American law does not reward breaking the law. So that is an inherent contradiction. In other words, there is an incentive for people to violate one of the most sacrosanct rules in international law, that is border integrity, invade the United States and get anchored because you were preggo and you dropped after you broke the law. So that is repugnant to the principle of American law. And I imagine that this Supreme Court will take that into consideration when they assess what is to be done. But all that has happened is a class action in one of the smallest states in the United States has been certified, and they want to go forward. And there's no telling what the result's going to be, but in any event, it's going to be an automatic appeal since one party is the United States of America, and that'll go to a circuit court of appeals and then probably very quickly to the U.S. Supreme Court. So don't expect anything of any paramount importance to come out of that. And you have seen a number of things that circuit courts have decided that the U.S. Supreme Court is squashed flat. You can take the Second Amendment. Some of it, I like what a certain district court judge did in Texas when he stomped down ATF in the Biden administration for coming up with a really crazed thing on pistol braces for people with physical afflictions. And that would criminalize millions of honest Americans. Well, they got ATF saying, oh, we're going to do this. And that's district court judge smacked it down, and it didn't go anywhere on appeal because everything above that agreed to it. You saw what's happened with now the more enlightened view on citizens being able to exercise their Second Amendment rights. There were decisions on the district court level pro-gun control and those that were anti-gun control. And when you get to the U.S. Supreme Court, they did not back the pro-gun control actions. So we have a much more meaningful interpretation of the Second Amendment in effect now, where our inefficient, deficient, non-existent law enforcement entities don't have to protect us at risk of a totalitarian government being slid in. So it's fascism, or some might call it communism. We can protect ourselves.
Let me insert this here, going back to that lawsuit in New Hampshire. It says the lawsuit was filed on behalf of a pregnant woman, two parents, and their infants. It's among numerous cases challenging Trump's January order denying citizenship to those born to parents living in the U.S. illegally or temporarily. The plaintiffs are represented by the American Civil Liberties Union and others. So, listen, the Supreme Court, didn't they just ruled in Trump's favor?
They did, but this was when see, what they were trying to do is just enjoin the government. The Supreme Court, on basically a procedural aspect of the case, said you had to have a real plaintiff and a real issue. So now you have. But see, there's an interesting side issue on this. If the statute of limitations has not run on the discovery that this woman was illegally in the United States, under United States Code, she can still be criminally prosecuted. And there's a question of if she's convicted, can you deport her back to where she came and keep the child in a foster situation or in an orphanage and raise the child that way, which happens all the time in the American system when some woman gets a long penitentiary sentence, say for murder or something like that, and there are no relatives close at hand or available to take care of the child or the children she has, they get taken into state custody. So same kind of situation can apply if you want to extend that thing about birthright citizenship to say the child she has is an American citizen, but if she broke the law, under the law she's to be deported, and there's no compulsion that says you have to be humanitarian and be nice to her for breaking the law. You can send her on, keep the child, or send the child back with her.
Well, it also says
we have been here to be a citizen and claim if there hadn't been a breaking of the law, we don't want to encourage breaking the law. So look, the poisonous tree's got to be chopped.
What says at issue is the Constitution's 14th Amendment, which states all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. The Trump administration says the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof means the U.S. can deny citizenship to babies born to women in the country illegally, ending what has been an intrinsic part of U.S. law for more than a century.
Well, that's like the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment was designed to protect former slaves. Its primary use has been the twisting of the language involved to protect corporate entities, which various states started creating in the 1860s and 70s, and they are deemed synthetic, artificial, or fictional persons. But since it says all persons, even the fictional ones, the mega corporations, are treated as though they are humans. And I'm surprised that nobody's attempted to get a corporation to cast a vote in an election or two or three through one of its corporate offices, because, hey, that's what it says. But I don't think anybody anticipated or wanted or contemplated. Well, that's the same as anticipated, but I don't think anybody was envisioning General Motors having a vote somewhere in Detroit. And do they get another vote in another state if they have an office in New York? When it comes to somebody running for senator, congressman, or one of the electors running to select the president. I don't think anybody intended that, but that's one of the inferences. So law has to be straightened out. It's a living thing, and situations change. Things happen to people that people did not anticipate.
Well, the Supreme Court, here's another case via Supreme Court. Now the Supreme Court denies Florida's request to enforce state law on illegal immigration. So Wednesday, the Supreme Court refused to allow Florida to enhance a state law that makes it a crime for anyone who entered the United States illegally to enter or remain in the state. In a brief undersigned order, the justices left in place an order by a federal district judge in Miami that bars the state from implementing the law. The groups challenging the law had argued that the state had failed to adequately explain why, especially given Florida's extensive and ongoing collaboration with federal enforcement efforts. The state must also be allowed to enforce its own state immigration system outside of federal supervision and control while this expedited litigation proceeds. Now, the Florida
All
law.
that means is simply there wasn't a proper foundation laid. In other words, it's not really right for appeal and final resolution at this point. There's a lot of proof that needs to be put in a record, and it has to work its way through channels.
Right. So an immigrant rights group, the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and an advisory group, the Farm Worker Association of Florida, went to a federal court in Miami to challenge the law, along with two undocumented immigrants who could be arrested and prosecuted under the law. They argued that the federal immigration law superseded the Florida law, and that the Florida law violates the Dormant Commerce Clause. The theory that the provision.
The Dormant Commerce Clause, it does. Federal law trumps state law.
Right. The theory that the provision of the Constitution giving Congress the power to regulate commerce between states also bars states from discriminating against or placing a burden on that commerce.
It does.
Can you explain that?
In other words, the Constitution has had something to say about it. The statutory law that is in place has something to say about it. So Florida cannot preempt what the federal government has decreed on such matters. The matter of diplomacy, international law, things like immigration, those things are under the auspices of the United States government. So what they say binds. Now, it's
Wait,
easy enough. Hold on.
let me ask you a question about that first, real quick. Because when you say the federal government supersedes state government, are we talking about the White House?
No, we're talking about the entirety of the federal government. It has three parts: legislative body that makes the rules, the executive branch that carries them out, and the judicial branch that interprets them. Now, the resolution of this is simple. The Republicans dominate the House, they dominate the Senate. All they have to do is pass an item of legislation, which they can do on an emergency basis, I imagine, if they chose, that allows states to add these things to their laws without infringing on what the federal government is doing. So that's the solution. It's more of a procedural matter. And what is a procedural matter? It means you just can't come into court on the last day and say we object to the state using this alleged confession by the defendant. Well, the procedure in effect says when you get an idea, a reasonable idea that you want to do this, you have to file a motion and have a formal hearing. If you forgot to file the motion, or you didn't, or you neglected it, you haven't procedurally set the stage. So
It sounds like all of this is like technicality.
that's exactly what it is, and that's a good word for it: technicality.
So here's the thing. So this is where I'm getting confused at, because if the Supreme Court, they're the top-notch court, if they issued a judgment in favor of Trump when it comes to birthright citizenship, why do we still have other federal judges district?
Because what is going on, this is a specific case that depends upon a specific set of facts, so that it might specifically come under the Supreme Court's ruling. The only evidence that is viable is something that's supported by somebody raising right hand and swearing or affirming that what they are going to testify to is true. People think that it's going to be like TV where there are all of these technical things and computers. That's not viable evidence under United States law. So when the Supreme Court rules on something, it can't do it on he said, she said. It's got to have a specific set of recorded facts from which to work. And what they do often these days, because of the deficiencies in the whole judicial process, because of such inexperience in the lawyers and in the jurists involved, they have to send the thing back because it's not ripe for them to hear it, because what the facts are unclear. And that a lot of times what they do in the media starts getting titillated and all excited or all depressed or all outraged about what the Supreme Court's done, is just said, hey, you haven't given us anything right here on which to work. We're sending it back so we can get facts on the record and see what we really are dealing with.
Right. So,
in other words, don't get excited. It's all premature right now. Law sometimes takes a while to grind those wheels. And we're used to, we want to know right now, right way. We're inquiring minds, and we want everything to be explicit in a 5 to 15-second soundbite.
So it's a lot going on with the migrant crisis, because we have all this technicalities going on with the Supreme Court, federal and state level. And at the same time, ICE is out here picking up people, arresting people and deporting them. You have Congress that's trying to push back. We already have over 10 million illegals, but some of the people that are being arrested,
60 million, depending upon the count, for the last 5 years, not 10.
Okay. That's why I said 10 million plus, but people like to say 10, 20, 30. So I'll start at the low, but put the plus because it's definitely higher.
Well, let me just put this to you. You know what makes this so crucial? How many people have died in Gaza? How many people are pissed off that the U.S. sent some B-2 bombers over there with some massive ordnance penetrator, 15-ton bombs, and dropped them on Iran? How many people are pissed off by what's going on between Ukraine and Russia over there right now? How many people are religious fanatics and they're going off supporting ISIS, Al Qaeda, etc., etc.? How many people are mad about what happened in Afghanistan? What is China plotting? Because it says we're going to take back Taiwan in about 2.5, 3 years, even if it means we got to do some shoot them up. So we have all of these things going, and we've got a wide open border system where anybody could walk across with pounds, tons, collectively, of military grade explosives and detonation devices and actuators, and put them places where they don't need to hijack an airplane and fly it into a twin tower, because they've already put the explosive charges where they want them to be, because some idiots were trying to do an end run on the system and get what they thought was going to be Kamala Harris to declare a bunch of people in the millions to be refugees entitled to political asylum, so their citizenship would be fast tracked. And had she been elected in November 2024, she could have retroactively dated their status as asylum recipients back to January 2020. And all of these people would be eligible to vote right now, and they would be able to vote in the midterm elections next year, which would guarantee, they thought, the Democratic Party absolute control of the American political process, like they had back in the late 1840s, when they were the only active organized political party in the United States. So that's what they were trying to pull off, and we're supposed to sacrifice all of our American interests, the economic prospects of the middle class and ordinary citizens, and we're supposed to jeopardize millions of Americans to getting done in by some kind of terroristic activity that's already been placed and is probably too far gone now without drastic action to undo. If you think the Twin Towers and 911 were bad, ooh wee, wow wee, whoopee. If you look at what happened with the courthouse in Oklahoma City, where crazy Timothy McVeigh used fertilizer to kill 240 people in one stroke, wow wee, whoopee. They've got a lot worse that's already in place. They don't, like I say, they don't need to parachute anybody in. They don't need rubber boats from submarines. They don't need any of that in order to get operatives in here. They're already here. That's why the paramountcy comes in about what the urgency is behind the courts resolving this.
I want to play this clip here.
That's my place, my home. Now, let me say this. Whether or not a criminal wants a better life or not has absolutely nothing to do with breaking the law. For years, either as a prosecutor, a defense lawyer, or as a criminal court judge, I've dealt with a whole lot of people that wanted a better life. They sold crack, they sold heroin, they had prostitutes that they ran, they were pimps, they robbed banks, they murdered people to commit armed robberies, all sorts of things. So because they wanted a better life, do we let them go and continue to do what they are doing? They are allowed to get away with enormous shoplifting sprees because it doesn't go over a certain amount. So just let them go because the system doesn't know what to do. So are we supposed to be supporting this damn lawlessness because somebody broke the law because they wanted what came from breaking the law? Remember the old thing, crime does not pay? Well, what are we doing right here when we've got a crime does pay, where we say to hell with our laws when it comes to borders? the devil with our homeland security, the devil with the interest of the citizens. This is the same attitude that's worked itself into lawlessness in the cities of America. This is what comes down where nobody's safe. This is what comes down where this city right here, Memphis, Tennessee, is the 10th most dangerous city in the whole world and the most dangerous in the United States of America. This is where there are 30,000 new factory jobs to be developed in the automotive industry, but none of them are going to the local residents. They're bringing in, so far, 15,000 South Koreans and the local yokels from mayor, chief of police, sheriff, city council, county commissioners. They're trying to set up a sanctuary city and break Title 8, Section 1324 of the criminal codes of the United States because they're getting kickbacks. The whole bunch needs to be locked up in a federal penitentiary.
Another
and one more thing, the employment rate in Memphis is abysmally low. And one part of Memphis has one of the worst per capita incomes in the whole country. And these clowns who are concerned about crime are trying to encourage it.
Well, another federal judge blocks Trump administration from ending temporary legal status for many Haitians. So last week, the DHS announced it was terminating their legal protections as soon as September the 2nd, setting more than 500,000 Haitians up for potential deportation. District Court Judge Brian M. Cogan in New York ruled that moving up the expiration of the temporary protection status, or TPS, by at least 5 months for Haitians, some of whom have lived in the U.S. for more than a decade, is unlawful. The Biden administration had extended Haiti's TPS status through at least February 3rd of 2026 due to gang violence, political unrest, and a major earthquake in 2021 and several other factors.
Well, I had a serious murder case in my courtroom that went unsolved for 5 years. They had it on Unsolved Crimes on television twice. But when they wound up getting a suspect, we went to trial on the first-degree murder case. Of course, it turned out that one of the assistant prosecutors and his mother were involved in it. And it was a fix and a frame. But, I mean, when somebody's been hiding out and nobody's aware of the fact that they have been violating the law, you know, the statute of limitations starts running in some instances when the transgression is discovered, but when there's no applicable statute of limitations, you just can't say he has broken the law and escaped consequences for a decade. Well, we don't have to let him prosper. And by the way, the Haitian problem is not just in the United States, it's in this whole hemisphere. Whether you're getting Central America, the Caribbean, or whatever, you have colonies of illegal Haitian immigrants who form a cheap labor repository for the area. Whether you're talking about Barbados, whether you're talking about Jamaica, whether you're talking about the Bahamas, whether you're talking about Bermuda, Costa Rica, you've got bad problems with that. So I'm not surprised. The United States government turned Haiti into a horrible place to be after it had such a wonderful origin with Toussaint Louverture, who beat Napoleon's generals at their own game. And it was looked at as too dangerous and a bad example for American black folk back in the beginning of the 20th century. And Woodrow Wilson and his successors sent in Marines from Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina, who knew how to deal with Negroes down there into Haiti to spread terror amongst the Haitians so they would not prosper too well and become what was felt an uppity example for the American colored to emulate. So they produced Papa Doc and a whole lot of other things, Baby Doc and all sorts of hell. So Haiti is not a nice place to live.
I guess. But at one point, America wasn't a nice place for Black Americans to live, but we fought through it.
It depended on where you were living. I'd go back and forth between California and Tennessee or Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama early in life with the parents. And when you're in the South, it was hell. There were some places in the South where you couldn't tell it because segregation is what it is. And then you were in California, and it had never been allowed in California. There were instances, racism, and it's a product of xenophobia, the fear of the unknown or the repugnance of the strange and different. And that's a human condition. So there's no way around it. You're going to find prejudice wherever you may be. But there were no signs in certain parts of the country that said no dogs allowed in the park or dogs on leash. But in the South, they had signs that said no Negroes allowed, or Negroes must be supervised by an appropriate white entity, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a different kind of thing, but where you were depended upon what your circumstances were.
Okay. Well, we have a migrant crisis. We have a migrant crisis going on, and
it's not migrant. That is
illegal migrant.
That is the word, illegal.
Illegal migrant.
Migrant is something that the Democrats, the leftists, and the woke folk and the idiots have put on the whole thing as spin, trying to say they're just coming here to migrate. First time I heard it was in the 60s. There was a gentleman, he wound up a professor at UCLA. He was Hispanic. He married a Black woman who also became a professor out at UCLA. And we had third world coalitions back then, so we would school each other on what was going on. And he took a bunch of us down to Ensenada, Mexico. And I remember him just going off on some Catholic priest because the priest was saying God does not recognize borders. And there's all of this wide open land north of the border. So the priests were encouraging the women to have all of the babies they could, to have Catholic souls who could go up north of the border and stay and basically bamboozle the American government into taking care of them. Now, we were looking at a woman that we got introduced to, I think had 27 children. Only 11 of them were alive. And the children, until they were 10, were naked from the waist down. They had filthy, dirty T-shirts, and that was so they did not get sores and boils and everything and rashes. And they were catching huge cockroaches, cucaracha, and putting them on wire coat hangers and roasting them to eat. And they were hiking when they got a little bit older with poles across their shoulder and pails down 2 miles to a watering hole that was muddy, and coming back, and that's the water they drank. And dysentery was rife and people were dying left and right. But these priests were talking about we need more souls and there's plenty of room north of the border. So Ray, that was his name, he was Hispanic. He said, I'm a good American. I don't like that. I'm a good human being. I think it's absolutely atrocious to do that and submit this woman and encourage her to produce all of these new graves by having 27 children, or maybe it was 25, of which most had died for one avoidable reason or another. See, that kind of thing's been going on for a while, but the heart bleeding, oh my God, we have to be humanitarian. See, they encourage stuff, and this will be the first bunch of little punk line folk, I call them, who will be whining, crying, and trying to give up the American liberties that we do have because they will want a totalitarian situation to protect them when the next 911 incident occurs.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Injustice for All with Judge Joe Brown, and we will see you in the next video.